الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد السلام عليك يا صديق فاطمة الزكية حبيبة حبيبك ونبيك وأم أحبائك وأصفيائك التي انتخبتها وفضلتها واخترتها على نساء العالمين. اللهم كن الطالب ممن ظلمها واستخف بحقها وكن ثائر اللهم بدم أولادها. اللهم وكما جعلتها أمة الهدى وحليلة صاحب لواء وكريمة عند الملأ الأعلى فصل عليها وعلى أمها صلاة تكرم بها وجه محمد وتقر بها عيون الذرية وأبلغ مني في هذه الساعة أفضل التحية والسلام. For the hastening of the reappearance of the Imam, please send a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, respected Maulana Sayyid Sartar Zaidi, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I begin by offering the Imam of the time, the Maraja, and each one of you, respected brothers and sisters, offering you my condolences on the passing of the Lady Fatima Zahra, salamullahi alayha. Oftentimes we are asked, why do we remember? Why do we spend time every year, or oftentimes, sometimes twice a year, for example, remembering the Lady Fatima? Recently, I was in my neighborhood, and it was the first time that one of my neighbors saw me wearing these particular clothes. And so they came to me and they asked me, they say, Alhamdulillah, you all do so much good work for Ahlebaith, but the only question that I have is, why do we always spend so much time remembering what happened 1400 years ago? Why not move on, focus on the present a little bit more? And I wasn't able to fully respond to them there. It wasn't the appropriate opportunity, but I wanted to mention this question, and sometimes the question comes from our children, so it's important for us to have the proper understanding. And one of the practical lessons that we gain from the last 2 years, the last 3 years, and what's been going on in the world, is we now better understand why we remember. Because when we remember the tragedies of the past, then we are able to learn from those mistakes. Those who didn't remember from the tragedies that befell the Holy Prophet, that befell those who were beloved by the Holy Prophet, we see that many of them, they struggled to understand their responsibility in our times. Whereas you see those who were the dhakirin, those who remembered the Ahlebaith, those who remembered Fatima Zahra, those who remembered the sacrifice of Sayyid al-Shuhada, not only were we able to make the right stand, but we see that almost across the board, right? We couldn't find exceptions almost. Even those who maybe they hadn't been making the right stands in the past, they came around this time. They understood. Right? So this is one of the reasons why we remember. Now, I want to spend these 3 nights discussing the sermon of Fadakiyah, the sermon of Fadak. This was the first recorded sermon in the lifetime of the Lady Fatima Zahra. Some of our great scholars, for example, Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, he mentions that this sermon is on par with Nahj al-Balagha, and it should be taught as a course in the seminary. Ayatollah Tahriri, this great Arif, the student of Ayatollah Saad al-Parvarin from the line of Sayyid Ali Qadi, he mentions about this sermon that for someone who has deep insight, someone who has basira, when they read this sermon, they will have no doubts about the infallibility of Fatima Zahra. It has such depth to it, right? There are so many blessings and there's so much barakah that's in it. Before we get to the sermon, which we'll focus more on the next 2 days and a little bit towards the end today, we want to talk about Fatimiyya generally, these Ayyam of Fatimiyya, and as well as the Lady Fatima herself. Now, some might say that in this time, when the Muslims are facing so much pressure, so much difficulty, so much oppression, so much enmity, people left and right trying to pull us apart, shouldn't it be the case that we focus on those things that unite us? Shouldn't it be the case that those things that may potentially pull us apart, we put them to the side? Right, so the answer to that is yes and no. Right? When we see that there's areas where, yes, it may be potentially detrimental, it may be something that might pull us apart from other Muslims, right? Then we have to ask ourselves, is this something that's foundational or fundamental to our faith? Right? If we see that it is, then we need to discuss it, right? We do it respectfully, right? We do it while recording it, right? We're saying whatever we say here, as Maulana Sartaj always teaches me, whatever you say here, you have to be able to say on the street as well, right? So we do it respectfully, but we're not pluralistic. We don't say, okay, well, everything's okay. No, we have what we believe is the truth in Amir al-Mu'mineen and Fatima al-Zahra and Ahlebaith and the Holy Prophet and Holy Quran, and we proudly mention it, right? But we have to also understand on the other side, when there's something that's not necessary, when it's not foundational, then we see how our maraji, they tell us to act, right? Wisely, with hikmah, choosing our words carefully. Right? Even I was looking at the ahkam when it comes to the turba. When it comes to the turba, Ayatollah Khamenei, what does he say? He says that if you see the picture that may be on one side of the turba is going to make people have a wrong understanding of Tashayyu, wrong understanding of Shia Islam, right? That they're going to say, oh, they must be worshipping Imam Rida, or they must be worshipping Imam Hussein. Right? If they're going to have this wrong understanding, then your salah doesn't even count if you prayed on it. To this level, he says to be careful. So for us tonight, and for us in discussing these topics, we're going to do it with care, we're going to do it with respect, but we're not going to back down. We're not going to shy away from the truth that is with Amir al-Mu'mineen and Lady Fatima al-Zahra. Send me a salawat ala Muhammad. So we speak our truth, but we still maintain that Islamic unity. Now, one of the important reasons why there's some emphasis on Fatimiyya is that it unlocks some doors for us, right? It unlocks some doors for us as a Muslim ummah. And this was part of the secret and the sir that is with Fatima al-Zahra, is that her story, her tragedy, unlocks some doors for those who are really willing to think deeply. So I just wanted to mention here 3 hadith that are in the Sahihain, right? Sahih Muslim or Sahih Bukhari. All 3 of these hadith are there. Okay, so we look at the most respected books of our brothers from Ahl Sunnah. What do they say? We say, number 1, that she's Sayyidat al-Nisa Ahl al-Jannah. Okay, she's the master of the women of paradise. This exists in their hadith corpus. Meaning that, of course, she's truthful, she doesn't lie, if she's the best of all women. If we have in the Holy Quran that the Lady Maryam would have angels come and deliver food to her in her mihrab, when we have that Allah said that I revealed to the mother of Musa, when we have that Allah says, let me give you an example, لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, for all of the believers, who? Imra'at Fir'aun, right? وَمَرْيَمْ bint Imran. That when he says an example for all believers, he says 2 women. When we have these types of women, but we still see in their hadith corpus that she is Sayyidat al-Nisa. Okay, so this is her status. There's no question. None of them will deny it as well, our respected brothers. Okay, but now look at these other hadith. We say, Qala Rasulullah. Now these hadith, I checked myself just to make sure. I said, I'm not going to go from some secondary source. So I had to go through Sahih Bukhari myself, make sure I found it there myself, with my own 2 eyes. Okay? It says, Fatima, bad'atun minni, faman aghdabaha aghdabani. Fatima is a part of me, and whoever angers her, angers me. Sahih Bukhari. Okay? I'll give you the hadith citation here. Okay? Now, next we see the last hadith that I'm going to mention from Sahih Bukhari here. It's mentioned from who? From Aisha. Okay? And it says here, فَغَضَبَتْ فَاطِمَةٌ فَحَجَرَتْ, about her father. So it says that it mentions her father's name. It says that she was upset, and so she stopped talking to my father. Okay? فَلَمْ تَزَلْ مُهَاجِرَتَهُ حَتَّى تُوَفِّيَتْ. And she continued in this state of not talking to him until she died. This is in Sahih Bukhari from the wife of the Holy Prophet, talking about who? Talking about the situation between the Lady Fatima and the first Khalif. This is from Sahih Bukhari. So now, what I'm mentioning here, why do we mention Fatimiyya? Why do we focus on Fatimiyya? Is because it has this key. If someone sits back and thinks, right, they're not looking at any books of the Shia, they're not looking at any books that are questionable according to their madhab, but they just think about these three hadith together. Okay, we've established that she's the best of all women. We've established that the Prophet said that the one who angers her angers me, and we've established that she was angry until the time of her death. And this at least opens the door, makes someone think. Right? So we can't just go past and say, no, just let's not make such a, let's not remember the Lady Fatima. Right? No, of course we have to. Right? This is our responsibility. Now, why so much emphasis, of course, on all of the Ahlebaith is that the Lady Fatima is just like the Quran. And you say, okay, we have this hadith of Thaqalain that they don't split, right? Until when? Until they meet the Holy Prophet at the pond of Kauthar. Okay, and so what do some of our ulama say? They mention these hadith that say, for example, about the Quran, Inna lil Quran dhahran wa batnan wa li batnihi batna. Okay, ila sab'ati abtan. It says that the Quran has a apparent and it has a hidden meaning. And its hidden meaning has a hidden meaning. Until you go 7 layers deep, meaning very deep. Meaning the Quran is deep. Right? We've been talking about this in our tafsir sessions. So what do the ulama say? Ayatollah Jawad Yamani, he mentions the same is true for Ahlul Bayt. Right? You keep coming, you keep remembering. Why? Because someone who remembers the Lady Fatima and remembers the Sermon of Fadak, they'll cry. But someone who studied the Sermon of Fadak, who has a better understanding of what's happening, who has more ma'rifah of the Lady Fatima, they'll cry more, it'll affect them more. Right? So we should never think that, okay, yes, we've done this so many years, we've done this so many, no. Right? Especially for our children, I have to mention these points. Okay. Fatima al-Zahra, like we've already established, she's praised by all. Right? The same wife of the Holy Prophet, she mentions that I never saw anyone resembling the Prophet more. Right? I never saw someone. From her, the one who, as history has stated, right, that they had their differences. Okay, it's in their books. I've seen it myself. From her all the way to who? To the Imam of the time. Ya Allah. He says that in the daughter of Rasulullah, there is a beautiful exemplar for me. Imam Mahdi Ajrullah Ta'ala Fajr Sharif is saying this. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And this goes back to that same point. وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِمْرَأَةَ فِرْعَوْنَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Right? For all of us, Fatima al-Zahra is a role model, an excellent example. Not just for the women. Right? The same way Imam Ali and the Holy Prophet are also examples for the women, the Lady Fatima is also an example for us. This is the Imam of the time talking. Right? Right? Ayatollah Vaziri Fard, the author of the Etiquettes, this book on spirituality, what does he mention? He mentioned once that if brothers understood how much they could grow spiritually from just studying and following in the path of Fatima al-Zahra, right, there would be no other man on earth that could reach their level. Right? Such an example she is for us. Okay. One of the reasons, of course, we know is her ibadah. Right? They say she was named Zahra, the radiant. Why? Because they say, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, because her nur in the place of her mihrab, where she would pray, it was illuminating the heavens. Right? The celestial beings would look down, right? Proverbially look down, and they would see this illuminated light because of her. Okay, this is one of the reasons they mentioned for the name Zahra. But it's also because of the social political stances that she took. Right? And this is what we're going to be going over here in the next few days if we send me a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So we'll start here just going over a little bit of the history of Fadak itself. Okay, so Fadak was, sometimes we think of it as like a garden, but a better way to describe it, it was like a village. Okay, it was a village that was full of date trees. And because of these date trees, it had a lot of value. Right? It had a lot of economic potential, as we would say. And so Fadak today, it's in a place that's called Ha'id. And it's about a 2.5-hour drive outside of Medina. Okay, at that time, it was a few days, journey to reach there. And according to our traditions, like the traditions of Imam Baqir, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, alayhim as-salam, salli ala Muhammad wa ali. When the Muslims were having a lot of victories towards the end of the Prophet's life, around the 7th, 8th year of Hijrah, that this was gifted to the Holy Prophet. It was not conquered. Okay, this is a delicate point. Because it was gifted to the Holy Prophet during his lifetime, and according to the majority of our Shia ulama, the Holy Prophet then gifted it during his lifetime to the Lady Fatima. Okay, and there's actually a verse of Surah Isra that came down, and it said to gift basically the rights to the people, to your close relatives. And at that time, the Holy Prophet, if I'm not mistaken, it's 17 verse 26. But the Holy Prophet then gifted this to the Lady Fatima, right, in response to this verse coming down. Okay, so this was the issue. Now, the issue here is that what if it was spoils of war? Okay, so first of all, if it was a gift, there's a question, did the Holy Prophet gift it to the Lady Fatima, or did he gift it to all of the Muslims? Number two is, if it was a spoils of war, right, in that case, it would have been something that belonged to all the Muslims and not just the Holy Prophet. Okay, so these are the historical discussions. Now, what happened was that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, after he passes away, and this is the greatest musibah, according to our du'as, it mentions that this is the greatest of the musibah that afflicted the Islam. Obviously, there's the discussion of Ashura as well, but just trying to emphasize how much of a loss this was, right? We can't imagine, right, losing the Holy Prophet and his personality and the wahi, the connection to the heavens and the earth, right? The one who Jesus and Moses and Abraham all waited for, okay? So when the loss of the Holy Prophet, we see that just 10 days later, this issue began to come forth. And the Lady Fatima Zahra, first, she goes, when she finds out that Fadak is being taken, right, from her, she first goes and has an individual conversation with the ruling establishment of that time, okay? What happened was that the first Khalif was told the following. He says, "An-nas abidu hadha dunya, la yuriduna ghayraha." It says, people are slaves of this world. They don't want anything other than this world. فَمْنَعَ عَنْ عَلِي فَدَكًا. So stop Ali from having Fadak. Don't allow Ali to have Fadak, this land that has a lot of financial resources. فَإِنَّ شِيَّتَهُ إِذَا عَلِمُوا ذَلِكَ تَرَكُوا عَلِيًّا وَأَقْبَلُوا إِلَيْكَ رَغْبَةً فِي الدُّنْيا. This is a big lesson for us here. What was it said? What was said to the first Khalif? Okay? And I won't mention who said it, but you can guess. Okay? It was said that you take this from Ali, alayhi salam, and what's going to happen is that surely his Shia, his followers, right, when they realize it was taken for him, they're going to leave him. It's going to be such a financial hit. The situation is going to be so difficult for him, they're going to leave him. And what's going to happen? They're going to come towards you, they're going to come towards us, رَغَبَةً فِي الدُّنْيَا, because they're going to want the dunya. Brothers and sisters, what's happening today? What's happening to our Shia leadership today? The same is being said. The leaders of Islam, the same is being said about them. It says, let's tighten the strings. Let's tighten their wallets a little bit. Let's sanction them just a little bit more. Why? Because their Shias are going to leave them. رَغْبَةً فِي الدُّنْيَا, because they love the dunya. And this is a test for us. It's not just a test for people over there. It's a test for us here. The strings will be tightened on us here too, in different ways. Okay, why? For the same reason. Because they know if they tighten things a little bit, they make it a little bit difficult on us. Right now, everything's automated, right? You don't even see your cash anymore, right? Tomorrow, hey, you show up and you try to get gas. Oh, it's going to say, sorry, cancel. Right? You're a Shia of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Right? What are you going to do? Right? Learn from history. This is why we study the history. Okay, so this was taken. Now, how did they justify the taking? How do they justify the taking? Is that it's mentioned that the first Khalif said that I heard this hadith. I heard this hadith where the Prophet said that we do not leave inheritance. And there's another tradition, another form where it says that we do not leave inheritance like houses and money, for example, but we leave knowledge and prophethood and these types of things. Okay? So now my lawyer side is going to come out, okay? What do we say? We say, first of all, you don't respond to the claim. You don't just go in there and start responding to the claim, right? First you see, well, wait a minute, why are we talking about inheritance? Right? The discussion is that this is a gift that was given during the life of the Holy Prophet. There's not a discussion on inheritance at all. Okay? Shaheed Sadr, Muhammad Baqir Sadr, may Allah elevate his status, this great Shaheed of Islam. Inshallah, our youth can go and study his life. One of the things he mentioned, he says that the worth of someone is how much you give to the ummah. If you want to know your worth, how much have you given to the ummah? That's your worth. Okay, this is some words of Shaheed Sadr. Okay, so Shaheed Sadr, he says, number one, he says if this is a gift during a lifetime, it's out of the discussion, right? There's no discussion on inheritance. Why are we even talking about that? Okay, but number two, he said that did this individual know this hadith that he heard from the Holy Prophet, but the heirs themselves didn't know? Just imagine, okay? That, for example, I have my son here, okay? My son's here, okay? And my sons, they naturally assume that they're going to inherit from me when I pass away, my ring or my Quran or whatever I have, okay? Now, if there is me as the lawmaker, as the lawgiver, right? As the, let's say, person in authority, the Holy Prophet was the law, he's providing the laws. He's providing the Sharia, right? Wouldn't it make sense that if I was going to say that, no, I actually don't give inheritance. So yes, in the Quran it talks about inheritance. In the Hadith it talks about inheritance. There's all these discussions on inheritance. But no, you're not going to inherit from me. Wouldn't it make sense for that exception to be mentioned to them before someone else, so that after I die, a dispute opens up? And they say, what are you talking about? Why wouldn't I inherit from my father? Right? And this is something we'll see. It comes up in the sermon of the Lady Fatima. Okay? So this is that. But even what we do as someone who is skilled in the art of debate and balagha, as the Lady Fatima was, what does she do? Is she mentions these verses. She says, okay, let's say I grant you that it was inheritance. Let's just say that it was inheritance. Right? She goes to the Holy Quran. وَوَرَثَ سُلَيْمَانَ دَاوُودَ. Sulaiman inherited from Dawood. What was the tradition that was mentioned by the first Caliph? He said that the prophets, we don't leave inheritance. It wasn't just about the Holy Prophet himself. He said, we the prophets, we don't leave inheritance. So she goes to the Holy Quran. Okay? Surah Naml verse 16. Then she goes to Surah Maryam verse 6. يَرِثُنِي وَيَرِثُ مِنْ آلِ يَعْقُوبَ. Surah Maryam. Where Zakaria is saying, I'm praying for a son. Why? So he can inherit from me. Well, if the prophets don't inherit, why is the Quran mentioning 2 places that the prophets inherit? Okay, so this is the way that and obviously we'll go into this in further detail in the next few days, but this was basically the facts about the case of what happened. Okay, most of these things are things that we already know. Most of these things are things that we already may have heard. Right? But when I was pondering over this topic, say, why are we going to discuss the khutbah of Fadak? I stopped and I said to myself, okay, I'm coming off of X amount of years in the seminary, okay, and X amount of interest in Islam that I had before that. How many times in my life did I ever actually sit and say, what did the Lady Fatima say? How many times did the Lady Fatima give a sermon? Right? It's mentioned that this was the first sermon, and it says she had a talk that's recorded for the women, right, who came to her afterwards. They were so moved by the sermon, they came to her, and then they say that there was a final sermon after that. Okay, these are the sermons or the lengthier hadith that we have narrated from her. But how much have I as a Shia benefited from this? How much have I read it? How much have I heard it? And I could honestly say that outside of what I had mentioned here to you all, that yes, there was this discussion about Fadak, yes, there was this discussion about inheritance, right? Outside of that, I can say that I didn't have any idea what was mentioned in there. And I feel pretty comfortable saying, if I ask you, what's mentioned in the sermon of Fadak? Right? I read it, the Arabic of it, it took me maybe 20 minutes to read it. Right? Maybe somebody's faster, it'll take them 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. Okay? Meaning that, what was it in there? Right? What is it in there that she, in her first time giving a sermon of this nature, right? A infallible, Ahle Kisa, the mother of the Imams, right? They say, the Urafa say, don't get it twisted and think that Fatima alayhi salam is Fatima because she's the daughter of the Holy Prophet and the wife of Imam al-Mu'mineen and the mother of Hassan Hussein. She is Fatima because of her spiritual rank. Her spiritual rank. Right? This person who the Imam of our time is saying she's a great example for me, she spoke in public for X amount of minutes, however long it was. How much have we benefited from it? I can say I personally feel ashamed when I think about it. Right? And this is why Ayatul Jawadi says that this needs to be made a class in the Hausa, right? Because of the depth that exists there. Right? That will inshallah go on in more detail in the next couple of days. Send me a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now the question here that sometimes we come to, right, and then we're going to inshallah start to move into the sermon, is that if she had already went and personally discussed the matter with the ruling authority, she probably had a good idea of what the response is going to be. Right? They said that she first went and spoke with a group. She went with a small group and she went and spoke. She said, "What's going on? I heard that this was taken from me." Right? And so she already knows what the response is. But now she still comes in front of the public. She still comes in the masjid to mention. Okay? And so the question is why? And within this question, we have to ask another question. It says that why didn't Amir al-Mu'mineen come? Right, we've discussed maybe at length, maybe in other spaces or other places it's been discussed. Other times in your life you may have heard. You say, why didn't Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, why didn't he come to the door, for example, when the door was knocked on? Okay? But have we ever thought about why isn't it that Imam Ali went to the masjid and talked about Fadak? There's a couple reasons here that Shaykh Sadr mentions. One of the reasons that he mentions is that a public revolt by Amir al-Mu'mineen, when basically this thing that was being taken because of political reasons, because they wanted to weaken Imam Ali alayhi salam politically, militarily. So him coming and publicly going against this could have had the same impact as him revolting. And we know that the Holy Prophet told him, if you don't have 40 individuals, then you don't do that kind of a revolt. Okay, so we say that one of the reasons that Shaykh Sadr mentions is he says that going and him verbalizing all that Lady Fatima verbalized may have caused the war to break out, which was not Imam Ali's responsibility. That's not what he wanted. Okay. Another potential was that the truth may not have been clarified by this. Okay, meaning that the same way that the truth may not have been clarified in the situation, we'll say the Fatima may not have been clarified there, but the risks of the war were still there. Okay. A third reason that's mentioned is that if Amir al-Mu'mineen went, you see, this is a very delicate point, very interesting point, right? And there's a lesson in it for us. He said that if Amir al-Mu'mineen went, it would have jeopardized the hadith corpus. The hadith that we have in our hands today, so that we can understand imama, so that we can understand Ghadir, so that we can understand Fadak. Right? I just went and I read from Sahih Bukhari. They said that had Amir al-Mu'mineen went and spoke to them with the language of hadith, saying, "Hi, you're saying you heard the Prophet say this, I heard the Prophet saying this." This could have endangered the hadith corpus. Why? Because there would have been one of two reactions. The first reaction is what? That they say that was never said. Right? Or that's a lie. Right? Weakening what we now all accept as all Muslims. For example, some of those hadith that the one who angers Fatima angers me. Right? We all accept as Muslims that that's a true hadith. Right? But those may have been weakened if that hadith, for example, was mentioned at that time. Okay? The other point is that if they didn't reject the hadith, they may have just disregarded it. They said, yeah, so that was said, so what? You see, what could have happened was that going after Fadak, going after Khilafah, may have put the larger position of Imama in question, in danger. Meaning that today, the door of imama is open for any Muslim to go and understand, for any Muslim to go and research, for any Muslim to go and use this key of Fatimiyya to unlock. But that's there because of the wisdom of Sayyidah Fatima and Imam Ali alayhi salam. So they say, okay, well, why did Fatima go? Why was Fatima able to go? Okay. Number one, the position was different. The position of an imam and the position of someone who's defending the imam is different. The responsibility of an imam and the responsibility of one defending the imam is different. Today, the imam has a particular responsibility, and you and I, as the defenders of the imam, have particular responsibility. Another point is why she went out and did this was to awaken the ummah. To awaken the ummah. Because if they could understand what was happening when it came to Fadak, they could also understand what was happening in relation to the larger issue. One of the challenges was that people held these individuals in such high regard. Right? And you'll see that in the khutbah when we talk about it, inshallah, tomorrow and day after, that the way that the Lady Fatima says it, it says it was unlikely that such a thing would have came from you all. Right? We should always be careful, brothers and sisters, that we never get fooled by personalities. Right? The more that we go closer to the end of times, the more we'll see it. If you just look at the history of the Islamic Revolution, right? From 40 years ago until today, so many people that were with the Islamic Revolution, but after a certain amount of time, they went off the path. Right? This is something that we have to be prepared for as we get closer to the time of the Imam. Send me a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Inshallah, because it's a weeknight, inshallah, we're going to wrap up in the next 5 minutes and finish up with the musibah. But this was why she saw it as her responsibility, her duty, to go and speak out, to teach us here in this day and age still, that when we have a duty, we go and we speak out. When we have a duty to do what's right, we do it with wisdom, but we do the duty. We don't delay, we don't wait, right? We go and we do what we know to be our responsibility. And she taught us the same lesson that we learned in Karbala, which was how to be victorious while being oppressed. Right? Even in her oppression, she was victorious. Why? Because as students of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and students of Karbala, we all know that victory sometimes looks like the bodies of shuhada scattered across desert. Sometimes this is what victory looks like. Because victory for us is not that we go and we win a particular election. No, victory for us is that we remain on our principles. Victory for us is that we pass the torch of true Islam, of the Islam of Ali and Fatima al-Zahra, the Islam of the Holy Prophet and the Holy Quran to our children. This is victory. Whether we see the victory or not, we're part of that victory. And this is the lesson of the Sermon of Fadak, that she knew that yes, I'm going to come out here and the effects are going to be what the effects are. These people are probably not going to change. The people who were insulting the Holy Prophet in his lifetime, on his deathbed, right? They're unlikely to be moved by myself or Ali alayhi salam. Right? But my responsibility is to this ummah. My responsibility is to these Muslims. Aitam ala Muhammad. Our teachers tell us you're going back to America, to the Shias, you're going back to the Aitam ala Muhammad, the orphans of the Ahlebaith. Like that's how they see us, as their children. Right? We're far away from our father. We're far away from the Imam of the time. Right? So this is what we learn from the Sermon of Fadak. Brothers and sisters, tomorrow and day after, we'll talk about the Sermon of Fadak, where the Lady Fatima goes into detail describing the characteristics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, describing the characteristics of Rasulullah, and describing the characteristics of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And we'll ponder over why she picked certain of those characteristics. And we'll benefit from the words of Ayatollah Tahriri, this great arif. He's written a book on the Sermon of Fadak. Inshallah, we'll benefit from some of the latif and delicate points that he mentions there. But tonight, we begin our commemoration of the Lady Fatima al-Zahra. And crying for the Lady Fatima, brothers and sisters, has so much reward. This is something that we all know. This is something that was taught to us by the generations before us. But what the ulama say is they say that crying for her with ma'rifah has even more reward. Crying for her after understanding her pain when she entered that masjid to give this sermon has even more reward. Put yourself in the shoes of Fatima Zahra tonight. Put yourself in the shoes of the one who for the entirety of her life, whether it was 18 years, whether it was 25 years, she was under the care of Rasulullah. She was under the protective care of Amir al-Mu'mineen. They say, why did the Holy Prophet call her Bad'atun minni, Bid'atun minni, this part of me? They say that a blind man came to the door. And the blind man came to the door, and this Fatima Zahra, she went and withdrew herself. And the Holy Prophet said, you knew he was blind, why did you move back? She said, yes, he couldn't see me, but I could see him. This was Fatima Zahra. This is how careful Fatima Zahra was. And this same Fatima Zahra, when the time comes, she's willing to go into the masjid in front of the entire community and speak from the heart. The Fatima Zahra who said, Ad-dar thumma ad-jar thumma ad-dar, the neighbors and then the household. She told Imam Hassan after praying the whole night, but not praying for herself. Now she's walking to the masjid knowing that her neighbors, these same neighbors that she would spend the whole night praying for, have now turned their back. Not just on Amir al-Mu'mineen, her husband, but turned their back on Islam. Turned their back on following the way of the Prophet, following the words of the Prophet. Why is Ghadir the greatest of Eids? Some say that it's the greatest of Eids because it was the day that the Lady Fatima was happiest in her lifetime. This is Fatima Zahra. We're remembering Fatima walking to the masjid, and remember that she knew the statement of the Holy Prophet when he told her that you will be the first to join me. This is Fatima Zahra walking to the masjid. It says, أنه لما أجمع على من فاطمة فدكا. When they reached this agreement that they would stop Fatima alayhi salam from getting Fadak, وبلغها ذلك, and this news reached her, لاثت خمارها على رأسها. She put on her hijab, she put on her chador over her head, and she started walking with a group of her close ones and her nisa towards the masjid. And it says that her walk, مشيتها مشية رسول الله. Her walk was the gait, it was the walk of the Holy Prophet. حتى دخلت على the first, until she entered into the presence of the first Khalif. And he was with a group من المهاجرين والأنصار وغيرهم. He was a group of the companions, and other people were there as well. Now I remember once hearing a majlis where the speaker, he was describing the lady Zainab entering upon Ibn Ziyad. And he said, فَدَخَلَتْ زَيْنَبْ عَلَى Ibn Ziyad. That Zainab entered in the presence of Ibn Ziyad. And the speaker couldn't continue. The sight in his mind of the lady Zainab entering the court of Ibn Ziyad was enough musibah for him. It says that some of the ulama in the crowd asked him to stop right there because of how much they had been moved. So it says she entered upon this usurper. فَجَلَسَتْ, and she sat down. ثُمَّ أَنَّتْ أَنَّةً أَجْحَشَ الْقَوْمُ لَهَا بِالْبُكَاءِ. It said that she then let out a deep sigh. And it was such a sigh that the entire crowd began to cry. Just like these tears here today, brothers and sisters, that inshallah will protect us on the day of Qiyamah. But I ask you, Ya Fatima al-Zahra, you let out a sigh surrounded by your women folk. But what about your daughter Zainab? Ya Fatima al-Zahra, you walk to the masjid. It says with the chador over you, it says they put a parda, a veil between you and the men who were there witnessing. But what about your daughter Zainab? Your daughter Zainab, who had said she had 84 members of her family, women and children, whose necks were tied together on the way from Karbala. You drew a curtain over yourself. But what about your Zainab, who was brought without her hijab? You gave your speech in front of these oppressors with your imam in mind. Your imam who was sitting at home waiting eagerly for you to return. But what about your Zainab, whose imam was in front of her with his lips being hit by a stick, with his head on a spear? ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. بك يا الله 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 بمحمد بعلي بفاطمة بالحسن بالحسين بالذرية الحسين. Oh Allah, we ask you for the sake of Rasulullah to, before we leave this room, to forgive everyone in this room for their sins. Oh Allah, we ask you for the pure blood of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, to forgive our parents, to forgive our teachers, to forgive anyone who taught us a word in Islam. Oh Allah, we ask you for the sake of Fatima al-Zahra, the beloved of your beloved, to hasten the reappearance of the Imam and make us his helpers when he comes. Wa akhir da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Fatima Hussein.